Everybody stops talking. Don't want to be recorded.
We don't want them to think we're having fun.
All right. He's turning it over to me.
Yes.
Yeah, so good afternoon and good evening almost, everyone. Thank you all for being here. 4:01 p.m. and I now call this meeting between the City of Walla Walla and College Place to order. Let's start by introducing ourselves, just who you are, where you're from, and that way we can get it on the record. Is that all right? Okay, we're going to start with Mr. Jessup.
Paul Jessup, City Council member for College Place, position 1.
Heather Sherman, City of College Place Council.
Ed Kohler, City of College Place, council position. No. I thought I could sneak in.
You moved.
Walla Walla City Council, East Ward.
Mike Riztello, College Place City Administrator.
Nabil Shalva, City Manager for Walla Walla.
And I'm Elizabeth Chamberlain. I'm the Deputy City Manager for Walla Walla.
Gabby Hill, City Clerk.
Steve Moss, City of Walla Walla at large council.
Rick Eskel, City of Walla Walla, South Ward.
Gustavo Reyna, City Council at large, Walla Walla.
Susan Nakaminsky, City Council, West Ward.
Tom Scribner, City Council, Walla Walla, at large, currently serving as the mayor.
And I'm Norma Hernandez, Mayor of the City of College Place. All right, so we have 6. Oh, yes. All right, let's go online. Do we have 3? Okay, how about we start with Mr. Espinosa?
Good afternoon, Tito Espinoza, College Place City Council, position 3.
Ms. Boyle?
I'm Monica Boyle, City of College Place, City Council, position 7.
Mr. Peterson?
Lauren Peterson, City Council member, position 4.
All right, I think that's it. No one else off screen? Okay, now we can start going. So we have 6 items on our active agenda to discuss regarding joint efforts between the City of Walla Walla and the Cities of College Place. So let's just get going, get this done. All right, the first item is wastewater, and I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Rizzatello to lead that. You're on the agenda.
Yep. Okay, thank you. So this is just an update to our previous discussion about wastewater. We do have that ecology loan that turns into a partial forgivable loan for wastewater functions in College Place. I was able to advocate with them to get this study admissible use for it. So what is happening with that is Department of Ecology, they're kicking in about roughly 50,000, and then the remaining 50,000 is basically being split in thirds between each jurisdiction, City of Walla Walla, City of College Place, and then the Port of the Walla Walla. The engineer, which is JUB Engineering, they do wastewater treatment engineering for both cities. They are the engineer that is working on this. The study, they have started on it. They're going to be meeting with all the involved jurisdictions. I expect we will have a report in hand likely by the end of October, early November, because at that juncture, College Place will be receiving essentially a loan and grant document from Department of Ecology. And then in the latter portion of this year, you all have an important decision to make, because at that juncture, the decision will need to be made whether this regionalization effort pencils or not, and then what financial mechanisms we're taking with the Department of Ecology. So that regionalization study will help inform that. And then that decision will need to be made likely the last 2 months of this year, because that contract, in whatever format we end up directing them to put it in, will need to be adopted basically by the end of this year. So that's pretty much the update on that, but JUB is working on the plan, and it's starting.
If I could just add to that a little bit, I mean, the decision then you're gonna have to make at the end is, number one, like Mike said, does this financially make sense? Because what we asked from the engineers was figure out how do we possibly serve both communities at the lowest possible cost while staying in compliance with the federal and state standards. So that's what they'll bring to you. And we'll see, does this actually work? And can the sewer rates both communities, does it make sense working together? And I would imagine they'll show us what it is if we're going to remain separate, so you can do that comparison. And then you're going to have to decide if that makes sense, how does this work? Does College Place contract with City of Walla Walla if that is the decision to use the Walla Walla treatment plant? Another option is, again, as we've mentioned to both mayors, Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater is a good example where they came together and formed their own city sewer district where they all jointly own and operate the treatment plant facility. And so there's that. What process will you use then to operate the sewer system? So there's a few points there, big discussion issues that you're going to have to grapple with. But like Mike said, we got a moment of alignment here. We have the same engineering firm. We have the same operators with Jacob, and it only made sense to actually look at this jointly. And with your, if it's okay, Your Honor, if I could just back up a little bit, just for the benefit maybe of our council. What we're doing here today is, and maybe this wastewater issue kind of brought it to the forefront, that our two communities seem to be closer and closer aligned. And I'm just gonna be frank. I mean, these two communities, like many of the communities I've served, wherever your neighbor is, there seems to be friction. It started when I was in Little Long Beach, the village, in a walk with the next village, they were always wrestling and tugging and, there was friction there. Same way when I went to Washougal, it was the next door neighbor, Camas, same way here. It just seems to be in our nature. And so what Mike and I have talked about is, first of all, I really get along well with your city administrator. He's a straight shooter, very capable guy, and I appreciate that in him. We see maybe a moment of opportunity where we can maybe reduce the competitiveness. We all want to be competitive. We all want to do better, but maybe we can reduce the competitiveness and really look at forming the partnerships and how do we help lift each other up and support each other, and what can we work on that's to both of our benefits mutually. And so this is a list we've described. We're not asking for any decisions tonight from the councils. We're just saying, if this makes sense to you, we'll further dig into this and explore this, just like with the wastewater, and do the analysis and then bring the results back to you at a future date. We don't have to bring them all back simultaneously. I don't think we can. And then you can sit down as a council and discuss this amongst each other if this makes sense to proceed, or we looked at it, doesn't really fit, and time out. So no decisions tonight other than to say, continue the analysis and report back later, or no, we have no interest in that subject, take it off the table and don't waste staff time. That's kind of the direction we're looking for. Does that make sense, Mike? That's perfect.
Yep.
All right, and that's all I wanted to add to the wastewater issue, is just a little bit of that background.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments regarding the wastewater?
Just timelines. Is that, you said at the end of the year, we need to, what is that decision point to the end of the year?
Likely the tail end of December of this year, so we will get the draft report by the end of October.
Okay.
And then at that point in time, we'll have about 2 months of evaluation, because on the City of College Place side of this project, we're expecting a draft loan grant agreement from State Department of Ecology, probably sometime in November, that at the latest we would need to sign off on by early January, which is why we'll need the decision point prior to that to understand what is the true amount that will be needed from the State Department of Ecology.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And the fact is, if you say go on that one, if you guys are all in agreement, say go forward, we probably still have a few more months of discussions and decisions after that point. Can I point out one more thing, sir? We're 160 years, this city is 160 years and 5 months old this year. It's probably the first time ever in our history that the College Place mayor has led a meeting at the Walla Walla City Council. Let's just mark out for a moment. Well done, Mayor.
Let's put the generosity of Mayor Scrivener over here.
He was going for, I'm sure.
Historic
The
moment.
JUB, they're going to look at what? I mean, the capability of our existing facility handling that increased load and what that would cost over, I mean, what specifically are they going to study?
Yeah, they're going to be evaluating really both treatment plants because there's issues having to do with water rights. Because to my knowledge, you have some downstream irrigators that depend on your treated effluent. And then there's even some water rights issues pertaining to ours and some of our flow that goes through Garrison Creek. So understanding if we can overcome that. Then if we can overcome that, then which treatment plant is better designed essentially to handle those loads, ours or yours. Now, and then once we even get past that point, then there's the other point of routing the sewage. And in the case of that, I've talked with JUB, and the alignment that they are looking at would take place under two projects, which we're in the process of getting grant funding for, which is a reconstruction of Southwest Majanier and Southeast 12th Street, because City of Walla Walla has a very large line under Myra Road. So it'll cover all of that as well as the costs and the feasibility, and that will provide all data in which you can provide your decision from.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Anyone online? All right, I think.
No. Hey, Councilmember Peterson, you know, I think this, I'm really enjoying this, this process right now. I would say, you know, I think after the study, at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see if separate ways, is it going to be 40 million per city, correct? Or is it going to be 40 million combined or something? You know, we don't know what that is, correct, Mike, until that study is done?
Yeah, correct. Because as it stands, if the city was to continue, the city of College Place was to continue on the trajectory doing it alone, the estimated cost was at 26 million. Now, the bet we're trying to hedge against is that if you remember looking at the wastewater facility plan report, there was also a phase 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
All of which personally terrify me because once it gets to phase 4, the estimated cost on phase 4 was 160 million, which a small jurisdiction like ours does not have. So I mean, really, when you look at the phase 1, could we afford it, but would it be painful? Yeah, but that 2, 3, and 4, you just can't do that. So we're really trying to hedge a bet against that.
You know, maybe for a little more background too, what happens with cities when they get into trouble with ecology and you're no longer compliant or not making adequate progress? Their typical stance then is they put a moratorium on that city or sewer district or community, and you're prevented from providing any more sewer hookups. Well, I pray we don't come to that in either community, because what that does is that just think of the amount of pressure that's going to put on our whole affordable housing issue if suddenly one community or another can no longer add to the housing stock. And so it's more than just sewer to sewer bill. This thing has ripple effects on some of the other challenges we're facing.
Anything else, Lauren? Does that answer your question?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. So I think at this point, we're all feeling that let's continue moving forward. We're excited to see the end of this and see where it takes us. Yes. All right. Broadband update, Mr. Rizzatello.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. There has been some exciting developments on this front after our initial discussion. There is a private company called TDS, and they provide internet services and cable services to like missing middle market areas. And apparently after our discussion, we ended up on their radar as far as where to put their next investment at. So they approached myself, and then right away I forwarded the email to Nabil and Elizabeth because they wanted to talk with us about that. And in essence, they are working on development of 5G and greater broadband networks, and they want to do it here, also Pasco, and then Yakima, and pretty much everywhere in between. Our initial comments and questions back to them as we were trying to understand what they needed from us, if there was some sort of inducement or what was needed. And in general, they just wanted us to move in a judicious manner with the negotiations of the franchises and the right-of-way permits. And in general, basically get out of their way. That's what it boiled down to. And then in further discussion with them, we were throwing out some ballpark timelines, and it sounded like, depending on how the processing goes on both cities' ends, they could get a lot of it built by the tail end of next year, which was very exciting. We really wouldn't be out any dollars. It's just negotiating the franchise with them. I had a meeting with them on Zoom this morning. They seem to be a very honest company, and so far the franchise negotiations have been very straightforward and cut and paste. So really our initial concepts about building out ourselves, the part that's exciting is I think it actually raised the interest to get additional private sector people in here so we don't have to do it. And it appears that they're really going to go very quickly on this. So Nabil, do you have?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised because as Mike said, our original approach was we were going to try to somehow get our arms around this and provide public sector broadband. And the estimates we heard started at about 25 million and up to do both of our communities. And we thought, all right, now we got to go get some of this grant dollars. Well, the first grants out there, we didn't even really fit because they basically had to have no internet service, and we have some just about everywhere, even though it's not very good. And then I remember when Mike invited down Petrochlor, the gentleman that ran Petrochlor, I mean, his statement was the best thing you do is create competition. And then along comes TDS, and I'll give TDS credit for this because usually when a telecommunications company wants to come into your city, under federal law, they have the rights to be in our right of way. It's not even do we give them permission or not. They have the rights under federal law to be there. And they'll mostly they'll just apply. This company actually brought a whole team in, met with us, talked about their company, what they do, how they would move quickly, because as they point out, they have no customer base here. They're not like Charter that they can do this slowly over time because they have a big customer base here. They have zero, so they got to get in there. Their price points have to be good. Their service has to be excellent. I asked what the price was, and if Elizabeth and Mike were there, it was about 100 megabyte service for $40 is what they're looking at, around $40. And that included fiber to the house, which is usually getting it from the street to the house is a couple $1,000 anyway, usually, because you got a curb cut, sidewalk cut, so forth. So based on everything we've heard so far, I mean, this sounds like, a really promising prospect. And just to show the service at TDS, since that meeting, I didn't even know until late last week that another firm has looking to come in here, Ziply or Ziply, but look at their approach differences. They didn't come meet with us at City Hall. They didn't reach out to sit down with their team. It was just we're applying, we're coming in. So I really like TDS's approach. It was just very down to earth, and we want to work together as partners, and we'll see where that leads. But the good point, at least from the administrative side, is we don't have to figure out how to come up with $25 million plus, and then how to operate this system. And so our thinking is we stand back and let TDS do this and go forth. And Elizabeth, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you guys summarized it very well. We were pretty intrigued. At first I thought, okay, are they kind of selling us something? But no, we were pretty intrigued by their approach and proposal, and the fact that their sort of parent company has already allocated resources to do this expansion within our region. And we sort of felt, hey, this is a pretty intriguing prospect, and we're not having to invest the millions of dollars and have another city utility that we would be trying to operate, which none of us have never ever done broadband before. And so we're pretty happy with the competition that's come into our area.
Mr. Moss.
Mayor, thank you. Obviously, two attorneys would need to look at the documents and to make sure that they're compatible between the two cities. That's what I'm hearing.
Yep.
The due diligence requirements that we may have just to check them out, maybe those will already begun. And then I'm just guessing, but maybe they're getting some federal incentive dollars to be here.
I talked with them this morning and asked that question. They are applying at a macro level for grants where they're listing several regions for the grant dollars. So this is one of them. So you are correct in which they are getting some inducement from the federal level because there is some money earmarked for private companies to be doing that sort of thing.
And so then would we be asked to lend our name, our support for them to proceed, or you know what the details of that might be?
With the private sector grant programs, apparently the private organizations can just apply for them. They don't really need letters of support because I asked about that. So at least as of right now, I don't think there's going to be a dependence upon that. The thing that they just kept driving home was really just about the processing of the permits and the negotiation of the franchise. So I think really their dependency on us will just be from moving that along at a good rate, and then the rest will fall in line.
Any other question?
And you mentioned this is a wireless broadband, so there's really, in terms of the network, there's not a whole lot of construction to be done as we were, initially thinking about, the fiber network being.
It's fiber. It's not wireless, it's fiber.
I thought you said 5G wireless.
So there is going to be
okay,
a lot of cutting and burying.
They use as conduits that are already there.
That in some cases they will, in other cases they'll be putting in their own conduits. We had the information meeting with them on Zoom today. They basically would break out the cities into like little areas of, let's say, 200 or 300 households, and then work at a very intensive level in those areas, and then move on and move on. And they do it in a manner so as to not outpace staffing of either city, but in the areas in which they would be putting in this infrastructure would be intensive, and there would be construction during those periods, but it won't be all over at once. It sounds like they'll be very methodical about it.
Mr. Jessup?
I had a question. I think somebody online had a question as well. But I think I'll let Ms. Boyle go first. I think her hand was up.
Thanks. I was just curious if you guys have had any contact with any other cities or any place that use this company, as far as, long-term, they come in, they do a great job of setting up. What do things look like year 2, year 3, as far as service rates? Do we get these great rates for the first year, and then the next year everybody's paying $100 instead of $40? Those kinds of things. Have we had any, have we looked into feedback from people that are actually using them?
We haven't done any of that due diligence yet. I don't know if Mike is at that point.
I'm only aware, I was only easily aware of 2 places actually where I went to school at. They do operate down in Urbana, Illinois, and Savoy, Illinois. And their rates, they went up a little bit, about 1 to 2%, but a year. But I mean, that's really what you're seeing with municipal utilities. So that's nothing to be really concerned about. I mean, I've seen the rate increases with the existing internet companies in town well above that. So in those 2 cases, it seemed like TDS had a well-run operation in Champaign County, Illinois, but that's about as far as I've investigated though.
And it's, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, you come in with a teaser rate, then jack it up. Well, I mean, we've heard of that before, but also as they pointed out, they are in competition. They're going to try to lure customers away. And even if they lure them away the first year, they're still going to have to be in service to keep them. But in this one, as your attorneys are going to tell you, it's not really a choice of council whether you want them to come to your town or not. Again, they are granted that right under the Federal Telecommunications Act. So they're coming, and the only thing we really have control over is just within that right of way to kind of work with them and make sure they clean up their mess and don't cause much of a problem while they're installing or conflicts within the right of way. But beyond that, we don't have a whole lot of control to say we don't like your menu of options, your pricing. That can't be applied to the franchise agreement. Unfortunately, I guess.
Mr. Jessup?
So just to make it clear, because I've heard it kind of pin back and forth. So essentially, they are significantly different than the other companies that we've discussed. And so it sounds to me like really their niche is getting that free money from federal government and then come in and get the competition and get the customers. So in that case, then being so different, TDS being so different than the other companies, what would the cities be on the hook for? I heard so far negotiating essentially the franchising and making sure that they get the permits and letting things run smooth.
Yeah.
So those are basically the two things that the cities would be on the hook for.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Espinosa?
I have a quick question, and it mainly is around the current landscape of our providers here locally. What is that going to do to our local providers like Pocket INET and other local ISPs?
Well, you're in the private sector marketplace and you're just going to have to compete. There's nothing government can do to benefit one over the other. The question earlier, are we going to be asked to provide a letter of support? Even if they asked us to, at least for the city of Walla Walla, my advice to the council would be don't do that, because now you're going to start pitting one business against another. Just stay out. They're in the arena. Let them compete on service and price point. That's about, I mean, I don't think it is.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add, I mean, I know for a lot of the operators in College Place proper, I mean, it's basically charter for the most part, Pocket INET and pockets of the community. But it's the need for additional operators because like CenturyLink, which is turned into Lumen, depending on their subscriber rate, they actually have been pulling lines out of certain neighborhoods as roadway projects have occurred, just because they felt it really made no sense from their operational level, put in new lines or replace them when we were moving around power poles and such. So especially seeing that sort of behavior, I think it's definitely good to get some increase competition in here.
Mr. Peterson?
My quick question about, I know Seattle, they've got 3, 4, 5 competitors together. It could be Verizon, it could be, who knows what. But with the 5G system being put in, what are your thoughts on that as far as other competitors that do not need to use well, I know it's fiber up to a point, right, to the 5G broadcast, but the potential for other competition from Verizon and let's say other cell providers, perhaps.
Well, I think there is opportunity for a plethora of competition. I just think that we haven't really risen to that level historically, because when you look at the grant landscape, as Joe Poirier testified to when he was here at the last joint meeting, unfortunately, a lot of those grants were earmarked toward the extreme rural areas or the extreme urban areas. And if you were in the middle, you were out of luck, basically, like we were. And I think since that has occurred, you're seeing a lot of these private sector folks realize there is a market of opportunity there if they so choose to take it. So I would envision that this likely will induce more competition and hopefully, I would say, stabilize the internet, phone, and other communications rates for this area, which would be good for everyone and really help with our goals of economic development and business recruitment, as well as livability.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Mike, I have a few questions. Do you know, have they mentioned how much their initial investment into this area?
They have not made the initial commentary as to what the.
Okay, so I was just trying to see if they knew how long for the rate of return, how long is it going to take before they start making money off their initial investment? Because that would influence how long they're keeping their price points from going up because obviously they need to keep existing customers and then grab new ones based on their product. Okay, where are they from?
So
Their home base.
So their home base, that they have regional offices all over the place. So it's hard to know exactly where their home base is, but they have regional offices over in Seattle, Chicago, and then other cities.
Madison, Wisconsin.
Madison?
Yeah, I was gonna say
Okay.
it's Midwest is
Yeah.
what I thought, yeah. They describe themselves as a mid-sized company. They said, we're not a Verizon, we're not a Charter. They're operating, significantly above them. But they're, a mid-sized company. I can't remember what their revenues were, what they described as 250 or 300 million a year, something like that.
And they don't plan on having a local office? The other ones don't. I'm just wondering if they are.
Yeah,
Okay,
they
okay.
did not ask that question.
Okay.
Can.
So any other questions or comments regarding the broadband? This is exciting. It's something we've really been trying to figure out for a long time and trying to nudge the port or the county to help us out, and we're just getting nowhere. So I'm glad that this came into our home so that we can work together and get it going and not have to rely on anybody else telling us no.
And Madam Mayor, I'll say, if they can get to our houses for $40 a month, fiber to the house,
Yeah,
that's a pretty good deal.
that's an extremely good deal.
We'll see.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, let's move on to the revenue sharing. And Mr. Shaw was gonna present on this one. Now, this one's an interesting,
It's kind of radical.
what's that?
It's kind of radical.
It is very radical.
But, I first arrived here, this was then Mayor Clark that talked to me about this circa 2010. And I did mention it to my counterpart in College Place, but there wasn't much interest in looking into it. And I have to admit, at that point in time, I thought, this is just a little bit out there. But the more I've contemplated it over the years and watched the relationships of the communities, I don't know, it just makes more sense to me. And maybe I'm just getting old. The concept is, and supposedly this has been done in other areas. She mentioned Minnesota, I think it was Minneapolis, maybe Illinois as
South
well.
Suburbs, yeah.
So where the two communities are get tired of competing against each other. And I think this is a significant piece of the relationship, challenges sometimes between communities that abut each other. Our financial architecture in our state really puts cities that depend on sales tax, as we all know. And we know how volatile it is. And if you want it, you got to lure in the retailers. And it's really the big box retailers like Target and Costco and Fred Meyer's that we dream of. And it puts us into real competition, as we've seen in our communities. While I wasn't here, I still hear the fallout from the whole Costco debacle 15 years ago or so. Costco remembers it as well. And so what this thought is, and then we both go to ICSC in Las Vegas. We're both competing with each other. You landed Walmart in College Place, but to do so, I think you put out an $800,000 bond issue. And that just strikes me as wrong. If Walmart wants to come into our marketplace and now we're going to give them money to come into our marketplace, I think it'd just be a lot better if our administrators could be shoulder to shoulder across the table to Walmart and just say, you want to come in? Great, we're going to work with you. We're not giving up anything. And here are the locations where you can locate. If we could actually work together and figure out how to split the sales tax revenue by per capita or whatever method that both agrees fair, we could then start working together instead of being super secret and who you're going to go talk to and we got them on the line. We could just work our strategies together. Then think about our zoning. We could decide where in our communities do big box belong instead of them coming in, pitting us against each other and deciding where they want to go. We could take the reign. You want into our lucrative marketplace? Great. But now you're going to come play by our two cities' rules. Sounds nice, on that description, how it actually works on the ground level is probably a lot more difficult. But if you're open to this concept, what we could do is look at some of these other communities, look at the agreements between them, find out how it's worked, what the pitfalls have been, what the bonuses or wins have been, and then report back to you in, 4 to 6 months and say, all right, this is what we've learned. And then you can decide go forward or cease and desist, if that makes sense. Mike,
Yeah.
again, he's probably got more real life experience on this. Mine's just theoretical.
Yeah. Well, in this case, I've seen it come to life in several areas. So in the state of Illinois, this is used quite a bit in the south suburbs. When I worked at South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association, the villages of Glenwood and Homewood actually had such an agreement because when the initial inducement agreement with Walmart expired in Glenwood, they actually closed their store after 5 years and moved across the street to Homewood. And then it left Glenwood in a situation. And then likewise, when I was up in Colfax, believe it or not, there is an agreement in place between Whitman County and Colfax and Pullman over similar issues of sales tax sharing. Where this issue really reached critical mass with me is in the years that we've all gone to International Council of Shopping Center events in Vegas. You think a jurisdiction has a situation where a retailer and just the story stays at that retailer. I will tell you firsthand it does not. So those real estate managers, what you'll come to find out is that the real estate manager for Costco will work there for 10 years and then get hired up by a Target or a Freddy's or a Winco. And then you'll be at their booth and they'll be like, oh, I heard like 20 years ago, there was like a war between the two jurisdictions and you're right by Tri-Cities. And, we don't want to get like caught up in that because I'll tell you right now, because unfortunately this opportunity come and went before we could act upon it. But the issue with Costco opening up in the Broadmoor Road 68 area, I mean, it sounds a little fanciful that we're so many years removed from when all of that happened way back when, but they remembered that. And that was one of the reasons why, I felt we had a very compelling argument to get them over here. They decided to just open another store in Pasco because memories like that apparently die hard. And there's a lot of very interesting retailers that we're starting to get on the radar with because you have your class A, B, and C retailers. And for the class B retailers, their market tends to be 70,000 people in a 20-minute drive time. When you pull that data out of Esri Business Analysts, in the last like 2 years, we've just hit that, the 70,000. So there's a lot of people who are looking at us that used to not look at us. And that's a critical concern for me that when I've talked to these folks at ICSC, it keeps coming up at different booths. So I think until we have some sort of agreement in place, that's always going to be the Achilles heel for both communities. Oh, I heard from so-and-so back in 2003 and 4 that happened. And I'm not sure how to overcome it unless you get something like this in place. So that's why I mentioned to Nabil, because I think it'd be in both interests of both communities to get something like this in place so we could jointly recruit and hopefully that historical bias of, hey, we don't want to locate here because we heard this war story, that will go into the sunset and will no longer be a consideration.
I think we're both up against Tri-Cities. That's our real competition between as Tri-Cities is growing this direction. It's just really our competition for housing, for businesses, for jobs. It's just incredible. And my thought on this was coming together and allowing us, it would make us a stronger unit against Tri-Cities. And then that way we can, rather than fighting and sabotaging each other's efforts, it would come out strong to know that both cities are working together. Old guards are out. This is a new Walla Walla in College Place, right? And coming together in a way that encourages commerce, period, to the area will benefit both cities, not just with the tax revenue and jobs, but hopefully it also encourage housing construction and maybe a little of the Growth Management Act, opening up a bit. We'll talk about that. So I just think there's so many things that this is going to this can reach out to by doing it this way. Mr. Escol.
What would be the advantage to the companies of coming into communities that are not pitted against each other? Because I would think that the more we fight, the more money they might get. And so would they just go elsewhere saying, you know, these guys are getting along, I don't want any part of that.
I would say that would actually be a threat if we were in a more urbanized area. So for instance, if we were in the south suburbs where you have like about 50 suburbs, if you had like 2 of them, that probably would be a threat. However, I will tell you with the agreement that was worked on between Homewood and Glenwood, you didn't see a mass exodus or businesses stop going there. In fact, they still have businesses along the Hallstead Avenue corridor, and they continue to have them. And especially given the fact that we are our own trade area over here, I really do not see that as a threat. Where it does become more of a threat is that historical study, because they actually have source documents they can pull back, going back in history on that, where it's like, well, hey, if that happened back then and there's that similar philosophy going on, am I going to sink like 2 million while both the agencies like try to like assassinate each other over this, or are we going to put our capital to work elsewhere? So that's really what we want to see, because I think if we have an agreement like this on the books, they'll realize that they can get something going. We do qualify for that Class B like drive time now, so that makes us our own market.
You know, and further, if there's a retailer that our citizens just really want to see in here, like Target, and what you described is occurring, and their target is telling us, well, we were looking at Pasco, and Pasco is going to give us $500,000 worth of infrastructure improvements, and we're getting along and thinking we don't have to give you anything because we're working together. Well, doesn't mean College Place and Walla Walla can't put their heads together and say, all right, look, how about if we both pony up X amount of dollars? If we really want them, then we can at least split the cost of the infrastructure. If the councils decide that's a company we want here, and go get them. We could probably compete more successfully still by being in partnership.
Trader Joe's. I'll get right back with you, Mr. Moss, but Mr. Peterson's had his hand up.
No, to feed off that last comment, Mike, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the phraseology here, but with the law changes in the state of Washington that reflects closer to what is allowed in the state of Oregon for setting up the infrastructure with the payback, with infrastructure costs with future sales tax, correct? Am I?
Oh yeah, the tax increment financing that's allowed, yeah.
Yeah, is there an ability for the two cities to work together on something like that? Or is that, so that goes back to the point of we're putting sidewalks in, sewer, electrical, whatever, build a store here, Is there any, what's, and maybe this is too far out in front of us right now, but what is the possibility of the two cities working together on a system like that? The new law, let me call it that.
Well, the new tax increment financing law, while it says that the initial district has to be originated in a jurisdiction, as far as the trading or ponying up of funds between jurisdictions, or for example, I mean, this is an idea I've thrown out in the past, where each of us do like a TIF district on our side of the Myra Road and jointly market it, and then essentially jointly pony up on the infrastructure and stuff. You can do it that way. And I would also say that if there's changes in the TIF legislation, we can advocate for that, because even though to a lot of people it isn't a radical concept, because that's existed in every other state except here for decades. But the legislation that was passed here was so rigid, there's going to have to be some changes in there anyway. So we can work together on this kind of stuff. And I think if we find little roadblocks in the RCW, it's not going to be that monumental of a task to get it tweaked, because already on some of the conference calls I've been on about TIF, there's a litany of changes that have to occur anyway to make it more mimic the successful ones in Oregon, for example.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Moss.
Well, this is exciting. Before we start labeling ourselves the bi-cities, though, what I'm hearing is that we're looking just for some general direction to ask staff to go out and do some due diligence, come up with some concrete examples of where this has worked. Because oftentimes the devil's in the details, as I think we all know. And take this step by step. Is that what?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, it's just something we want to make sure both cities are comfortable with even exploring. Mr. Reyna?
And I think you just mentioned a little bit of that, but in terms of planning, right? If we, as we do a lot of our planning and zoning, we look at areas that look really appealing commercially because of access to highway, et cetera, where we can then invest equally in the infrastructure to get access roads, crossings, et cetera. But then have a commercial zone that becomes even more attractive because then the retailers have a lot more ability to attract customers. Is that part of this thinking as well?
Well, yeah, because like in Illinois, for example, you'll have streets that bisect multiple communities, and how they market it to the retailers is like, hey, it's a Halsted Avenue corridor. To go develop here, you have these type of TIF incentives, and they advertise it in the macro sense, because a lot of times these retailers aren't really concerned, oh, I'm going to go in this city or that city. It's, I want to be in this market, period. And I want to know what's at my disposal. So, I mean, if you make it easy for them that way, you'll also likely get the retailers a lot quicker. I think we're everyone's like in their own sandbox. That adds to a level of complexity because a lot of them are making very split second decisions. And if it's too complex, they just move on to the next market. So it hedges a bet against that as well.
But following up on that, in the back of my mind, and I don't know, I'd have to talk with the zoning experts, but it's been, I've heard the comment before. I like the way your town's laid out because your big box national brands are over on 9th Street or down by Myra, and you've taken care of your Main Street. Well, that just happened. That wasn't by regulatory control. It just happened and market. But maybe if we use this approach, we can now start working with our zoning standards. So regulatory, we say, okay, look, we really don't want big box, and it's better for our quaint main streets and yours, College Avenue. It looks beautiful. Keep the national brands out of there. So it's more homespun and mom and pops and unique shops that are interesting rather than the same national brands you see in every city across the nation. And so maybe from that sense, it would help preserve some of the character of our communities, maybe.
I've told Mike that my biggest nightmare is becoming a strip mall city, like in the West Side, Federal Way. I don't know if you're Auburn, there's like a strip mall after strip mall and
Tri-Cities.
Change. Yeah, there you go, I suppose. Yeah, it's like, that would be my nightmare over here.
Is there any retroactivity in this thing? So like businesses that are already in place, do we go back and look at how everything, who gets what?
I think that would be really difficult to do. I kind of, again, we'll go explore and see what other communities done, but at least in my mind,
I've never seen.
what's done's done and just moving.
Anybody ever, do they do that, or that's not on
I've
the table?
never heard of that, honestly.
It would probably be really disruptive to the city's budgets. Suddenly, now you've got less revenue or you got more revenue. If you've got the more revenue, it's always easy to spend, but those that would have to cut 15 or 20 or so.
What kind of
We want to negotiate. This is a win-win solution we're looking for. You're putting us back in that competitive box.
Does anybody want to express a concern, a stronger, we have one, but is anybody's a concern coming through your mind that we're just not thinking of? Mr. Jessup?
I had a question. This is more based on my ignorance, but looking at, you're describing corridors. But from here, what is the next steps in discussing, deciding, thinking about the zoning when we don't have shared space? When we look to a highway section that's not necessarily a shared corridor between the two cities, it's one city or the other, but we realize, wow, it's a really good spot and the box stores want to go there. Is that a part of the next discussion?
I think, at least in my mind, and being ignorant like you on this subject, because I have not analyzed it, but at least in my mind, Fred Meyers wants to come to town. Would it really matter if it was located somewhere in College Place, nowhere near a common corridor, or located in Walla Walla, nowhere near a common corridor? Who cares? As long as we agree, we're recruiting together. This is the deal. Every development that comes in that's over X square feet, we're going to agree that we're going to recruit and work together and split that sales tax revenue. I mean, that's just in my mind. And again, that's without any detailed analysis.
Sure, great. Yeah, I mean, to me, really, the split would make more sense, not so much by corridor, but whatever square footage is, as we do the analysis it lands on. I know some of the historical ones are 50,000 square feet, but since the market reemerged, a lot of the big boxes outside of your grocers are now in the middle formats around 30,000. So that tends to be the magic number now. But I mean, that can be decided as we do figure out what's out there.
Ms.
I'll
Sherman?
say, like, my concerns, I think, will hopefully be addressed in a contract, in an agreement. And so that's where I'm kind of waiting to see, how do we account for the construction costs or utilities revenue or all of the other
Property tax.
things, property tax or law enforcement, fire responding, like who's all of that. So it sounds like it's been done before. We're not reinventing the wheel. And so being able to understand how that works out, because we're not too far away from controversy between the two cities or competition. Is that to make sure that it is written well enough that it outlasts all of us and makes it better for the citizens of the valley. That's the point of all of this.
Yeah, exactly. And the big point of it too, I want to learn is, unfortunately, you got to think about dissolution, because as you said it, what's a relationship and who's going to be sitting in these chairs?
Yeah.
And then breaking that apart could be very painful to either one or both cities. And so we've got to think that through too. There's a lot to learn.
All right, anything else?
I have one more question. How does this impact you guys next week in Las Vegas? Does this say, hey, our councils are kind of working on this, or do you guys still just go and like have secret conversations? And
We're not even going to Las Vegas this year. We pulled out.
oh, you're not going? Okay, well, then we're good.
Mike, let's talk.
Split the airfare.
This is about building trust.
All right, so next is a Myra Road corridor analysis. And Mike, you're gonna present on that one.
Yeah, I brought this up for a number of years. And I think we need to work on this together. Just a study on the Myra Road corridor, figuring out what the needs of both jurisdictions are. My main concern is that several times over the years, WASDOT has expressed at some point the 125 designation would shift from 9th over Myra Road. And I know from when I was city administrator in Colfax, trying to get any sort of improvement on a state highway, because Main Street in Colfax was State Route 195 was a nightmare, and it doesn't really happen. So if there's improvements or things that either city needs on Myra Road before that juncture happens, an analysis essentially goes through all of that, or at least if we can tackle it before they take on, it's in a document, because I know in some other jurisdictions they have that, they were able to negotiate better with WASDOT at a later time. But as it stands right now, where it's just pretty much there, if they take that on, it would be very painful to negotiate with them. So just a document spells out the needs and stuff of both cities and prioritizes them so we could get grant funding. Because I mean, like College Place, we have the Whitman property and various properties near Garrison Village Way, but then you all have properties up north of Electric Avenue. So I mean, and then also the property south of 125. So I mean, really, there's needs on both sides with this corridor, and we just need to get ahead of it before WASDOT grabs that road, because then it's going to be a lot.
Yeah, and it's already shown in my tenure here where we've like when Myra Road, not run Myra, we were doing Rose. And we're coming down to Myra Road where the two cities meet. Well, there again, no planning between the two, and it becomes a stumbling point of how do the bicycle lanes continue now with this intersection or not? And Mike's right. If we just both brought, both of our people together, along with some engineers, it's probably gonna take some traffic analysis. We could do, I think, a better job. And I know Myra Road too has been another sore point between the two cities in the past as well. So I think we can do a better job partnering together and just looking down the road and seeing what makes sense. And of course, we got to take the traffic engineer's advice as well. But I know Commercial Avenue, for instance, has been a real problem spot as well. And but bring the engineers in, let's sit down and let's figure out again, building trust and not competition. How can we work together and make this better for both of us?
Does neither city any good to have one side of the street look one way and the other side of the street look the other way.
God, that's right.
There, if you do one side and this other side's in bad shape, well, then you lose out on your investment. If you're on this side, then you're going to look bad because look what that side did. So it's just not ideal for us to, as on roads that we continue to share. And especially if WASDOT comes in to get up ahead before they do. Questions or comments?
So if we're all in agreement conceptually, what are the next steps that staff are looking for?
We would probably bring in our Public Works teams, and I don't know if we bring in engineers externally immediately, but just sit down and just start hearing what are College Place's issues with Myra Road, what are our concerns, and just start working through it. And again, I mean, I don't know the whole story behind it, but I believe, again, this goes back to some of that competition over retail and commercial and trying to block one another out and make sure that one or the other got it all. If we can go back into it and say, look, again, we're going to work together. Let's look at this corridor. How can we change it? Not necessarily change it, but how do we just do a better job of planning and putting in infrastructure in the future together? That's the concept. Again, we would bring this back to you as we go through. It's nothing that administratively we would do ourselves as by agreement of the councils.
Anything else? So we say move forward with the analysis. See where we go with that, right? Okay. Okay, so it is 4:56, and I bring that up because this next one's not going to be an easy one. So we have an hour to discuss both the Regional Fire Authority and the Growth Management Act. So I want to make sure that we get but Mr. Shaw is going to start off on our Regional Fire Authority discussion.
Sure, we're clearly been the ones that have been pushing for this. There's no question about this between place. We believe that this is worthy of deeper analysis. We have been doing the analysis. Our concerns, of course, is we're the ones who've been providing ALS throughout the county. It's become more and more expensive to provide. And so our interest here is really coming together. Again, it's like we talked about some of these other projects, whether it's wastewater or broadband or sharing, in order to try to provide a high level of service equally at where we both share the costs. The RFA would, if it were approved, it takes it out of College Place's hands. It takes it out of the city of Walla Walla's. It would be a separate district that would operate it, but it would operate it for our areas. And we just believe that in terms of the longevity of the service, consistency of the service, and really in fairness of the cost, right or wrong, we believe we're packing the majority of the cost for providing ALS. And we believe that our citizens could probably do better if there was an RFA in charge of this that didn't look at it as Walla Walla or College Place, but just as an area to operate and how to provide that service consistently, fairly and evenly going forward. That's really what our interest. And there are examples throughout our state. But we've looked at Oregon, Tualatin Valley. We've looked at a lot because they were the first most successful. But now there's many examples in Washington state. In fact, I just learned recently that the most recent ones doing this a month or two or three ago, or they're putting it on the ballot, I guess, is Wenatchee and East Wenatchee. That used to be competitors on everything. Well, they're now coming together to form an RFA. So what we're asking on this one is similar to these other ones. We're not asking for a decision, but what we haven't done with FCS is just really, what if the two cities, because you need at least one more dance partner to form an RFA. We can't, I guess we could do it by ourselves, but it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't achieve what we're after, and that's uniforms, all playing under on the same level playing field. You need a dance partner, and we just really haven't analyzed. We tried to do it 3, but I guess trying to get 3 dance partners going all at once just isn't the easiest. It might be easier just 1 dance partner. So that's the idea. Is if the councils are supportive, we would drill down just looking at College Place as a potential to partner in the RFA and really work out the financial impacts and how would that work and what would the cost be. And I know one of your concerns is what we call a combined department, where it's both professional and volunteer. And that's been our thoughts. If we go into this, we understand it's probably going to have to be a combined department. And I have seen that in my past as well. I saw that at Washougal when we worked at Camas, with Camas. We were a combined department, both volunteers as well as professionals. So it can work if there is the will behind it. I don't know if I'm leaving out anything, Elizabeth, if you'd like to add to that, or I know the mayor and Councilmember Moss have been very interested in this.
I do want to mention, as we're talking about this, at College Place City, Fire Chief Winter is here. So if anybody has any questions that he might be able to address, we have the expert here.
As our deputy chief.
Oh,
as well.
see?
Yes. Yes. Deputy Chief Knowles is with us as well. So.
So I'm not sure if the council members know that College Place has a majority volunteer fire department. So how many employees do we have?
Currently, we have 5.
5, and then the rest are volunteers. So our cost is much more manageable for a city our size because we have so many volunteers, and we've had a long history with volunteers, and we've got a lot of commitments still that there's no concern about losing our volunteers anytime in the future. So it's a cost containment effort as well for us, that our taxpayers, our residents don't have to pay union wages, union benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the big weight difference is between College Place and Walla Walla. And I think that's become where we're having a hard time getting past. And I'm going to say and it's probably College Place. It's having a hard time getting past that point, just because, well, first of all, about 4 years ago, is that when we had that RFA analysis done?
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago. About 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
So probably before most of you were on the council, those of us in College Place, I don't know if you remember reviewing it, Heather and Laura, but we had that big book. It was like this big. And so we have had it analyzed once before, and it was not it was not exciting for us. Let's put it that way. It was not something we were really excited about after reading the analysis and the cost. I think the cost would jump up significantly for both cities. Mike, do you recall what it would jump up for?
Well, I mean, for us, even like with a levy swap and stuff, because the previous mayor was looking at that for a time, it would lower the cost to the city government, but relative to like what the taxpayers were paying on a College Place bill, at the time, it was like up about roughly $250 at that juncture, even with the swap that the previous mayor was looking at. But I mean, the concept itself is a solid one. It's just the minutia of the numbers and the,
right,
operations.
Right. Okay, let's go for before I keep talking more, I want to give everybody else an opportunity because there might be thoughts, ideas, questions that come up. Do you have something you wanted to add?
Nope, I'm just listening.
Okay. Mr. Esco.
And maybe Chief Knowles might be able to answer this, but what does the firefighters union think about the idea of a joint department?
Through this past SES study this last ago, we had entered into talks. In my opinion, it has been a positive. This has been the most positive. The firefighter union has been since we started.
And how would the issue of volunteers meshing with the professionals, how does that work?
Well, that's part of the first answer, right? I mean, the positivity that we've seen within our Walla City Fire Department at this time has never been more positive. And that's knowing what we're getting into, right? That's part of it. Part of my-
I mean, as I was thinking about it, part of the reason that we want to do this is because of the ambulance service.
Mhm.
But if Walla Walla cut off your ambulance service, then that would make you want to join this.
Right. Well, we have our own ambulance service. It's just the ALS.
Right.
Right.
But
That-
I'm just saying that is the kind of the big and expensive part of this whole thing is the ambulance, the advanced life support ambulance.
Sure.
service.
So what is the term around that? What brought that? How did Walla Walla end up with it?
With ALS.
So with the ALS, right? Yeah.
How did it end up with it? I think it was just like we ended up with our own library as it was a service that was needed and as regulatory, it was in the 1980s that the regulatory requirements for ambulance service really started kicking in. And they started differentiating between BLS and ALS. I was there, I was a volunteer in the 1980s and we were all BLS. And then they kicked in the ALS requirements and that became very cumbersome. Paramedic were, and that's where the expense is in the ambulance service. BLS is pretty straightforward, just, some basic training, but you can only provide them basic response and service. And it was that ALS component that really pushes up the cost and the training.
Mr. Zatella?
And then I'll just provide a little bit of tangential history on the college place side. I know the city itself had an ambulance service looking back in the historical annals over there until about 89. Then I believe past that, there was like that whole regional EMS levy thing. And then from that juncture, it went to where College Place didn't have the ambulance and you all had the ambulance. And then over time, from my knowledge of it, and Chief Winger, if you want to chime in, because you've been here a lot longer than me on that. So you'd actually know the facts more, but basically the costs on that and the delta of that relative to the EMS levy were getting a lot back. And then based on that was when I would say a decision from previous mayor and the council at that time to do our BLS. Did I butcher that or was that?
So, and I'm sure Chief Knowles will correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years ago, we were approached by the city of Walla Walla to start our own BLS service because Norfolk was getting extremely slammed calls. And a lot of those were coming to College Place. Primarily, we have a lot of nursing homes, and that's where nobody likes to go because it's 3-4 times a day to some of these places. So we started up that BLS service. And statistically, about 80 to 85% of all the calls that happen in College Place are that BLS level. We're just needing that ALS for, what do you think, 100, 150 calls that are transported maybe? Somewhere in that range. The rest of that, we were able to absorb, and we ran 1,500-ish EMS calls last year. So we felt we relieved some of that burden. Since the call volume has skyrocketed for City of Walla Walla and us, they may not feel that we did a whole lot, but if we gave them back 1,500 calls, I would hope to see that there was some difference. I'm pretty sure.
No, we noticed.
And Chief Knowles knows I don't like being hugged or touched by people, and I get hugs from their guys. Thanking me for starting up that BLS service, and we don't want to get into the ALS service if we don't have to, because the few calls that we get that are ALS are really hard to keep our skill sets going for, to keep paramedics. We saw an 80-year-old, we saw another 80-year-old. We don't have car wrecks. We don't have the flashy, glamorous stuff you want to watch on TV. What? If you watch 911, it's a show. Lava falling from the sky, all of that. That's just not cultural. That's not our demographic type. And so that's why we're in the ambulance service now. We just passed last week our ambulance utility to give us funding for 4 additional firefighter EMTs. So that really helps because for some reason we can't figure this stat out. But if someone knows there's an EMS call going on, they call. And so we have 2 EMS calls always overlapping, it seems, about every day. And so that extra person is really going to help us 24 hours a day to help provide that. Once again, I don't want to get into the ALS service. I want to be on record for that in case the EV's listening.
They won't put that.
Okay, so my heartburn, and I think we kind of discussed this over lunch, and where what I'm trying to visualize. So the Regional Fire Authority would be a separate entity. It would take the fire department off both cities' budgets, off their books, and the citizens would be dealing directly with the RFA. That's where their taxes will be charged. I have a hard time with that because College Place residents will end up paying a whole heck of a lot more to that RFA than they're paying to the College Place right now. So my issue is not around this, it's around what's it going to do to the citizens of College Place. We have many older people, we have a lot of fixed income people. And that's my concern is that, you know, right now I don't know the number, they're paying, let's just say $50 for the service they have now. But to have almost the same service, they're going to end up paying $300. I just can't stomach that.
What if you get District 4 involved? Does that lower the cost for your city residents?
I don't know. I mean, the RFA would decide what they need.
Ma'am, what we haven't done though is really just look at the 2 cities in itself. My gut is bringing in District 4 pushes up the cost because you have so many satellite stations to
That's right.
maintain and operate. Whereas between us, you have 1 fire station, right?
Yeah.
And we have 2, that's 3. They're all centrally located. And so, I mean, what I would ask.
Taxpayers to fund it.
Pardon?
It would have more taxpayers. to
It
fund
would. And so that's what I'd like to do is really just look at that through the lens of the 2 cities. What can we do? I understand what your target is. I don't want to see a big increase for my citizens, but together with looking at that model and your ambulance fee that you put in and our ambulance fee that we'll probably end up having to readopt. If we put this all together, again, it's like the alternative analysis with the wastewater plant. Let us go really run the numbers and see what it is and how it bears out.
Mr. Jessup.
I'm entirely too new to have too much background, so my questions are just coming from defining. So when you mentioned dance partners, that's what you're referring to as College Place, Walla Walla District 4, or what does the region look like and to whom are you referring to when you're talking about potential dance partners? The second question, if I may, is who then is paying the tax for these services or who's exempt?
So the dance partner, you're right. It was, we looked at the 3, the city of Walla Walla, city of College Place, and District 4. That's where we were all coming together to look at it from that viewpoint, that perspective. And the taxpayers would end up being those that are within that district that's formed. For instance, if it was College Place and Walla Walla, it would be the city limits of the 2 combined cities. Everybody inside that circle would then vote for their Walla Walla Valley RFA. And in fact, that's how it's formed. The city councils just can't form it. You can say, yeah, we're interested, but at the end of the day, the citizens have to vote for it. You have to put it on the ballot and they have to say, we want to do this. So it's just not the test of internally here. You've got to stand the public test out there and go through, just like with any other proposal. Here's what you're buying. This is what it's going to cost. And this is what you're going to get.
And that includes business entities, schools, universities, that includes everyone within these boundaries.
Everybody pays property tax.
Everyone who pays property tax.
That's right. So the universities and Whitman, they can vote. They're citizens of our communities, but those institutions don't pay property tax.
So then the costs that could be dispersed through those entities actually then are, I combine it for lack of a better term, back to the property tax paying citizens.
Yes.
Correct. Just like it is today for your College Place taxpayers, property taxpayers and ours.
So if we had a regional fire authority, the funding source is going to be property tax, correct?
Yeah, well, it is primarily property tax, but it does allow you to institute things like ambulance fees, and then there's
Fire benefit charge.
yeah, fire benefit charge, which nobody's doing in this valley yet. But so there are a couple other ways to collect taxes as well.
But that all comes on their property bill, their tax
Oh,
bill?
if it's
No.
a fire benefit charge, it's a direct bill is my understanding.
That one would be.
Oh, okay, so hang on. So we have an RFA and the principal source is a property tax.
Yeah, that's the typical most
Okay.
standard.
Currently, the city of Walla Walla, city of College Place, get into our general funds property tax.
Correct?
Would we, the two cities, if an RFA were established, continue to get the same amount of property tax? Hang on, because I'll use the city of Walla Walla. Out of our general fund for the fire department, $4.5 million approximately.
That's just the fire department, doesn't include ambulance.
No, I understand. We got an ambulance fund. I'm just talking fire department.
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
$4.5 million, and a portion of that comes out of our property tax that the city gets. Correct? So if we had an RFA, we, the city of Walla Walla, would not be paying $4.5 million out of our general fund, but we continue to get that revenue. So all of a sudden, we would be $4.5 million a year richer to fund other things. Is that an outcome of having an RFA?
I don't know that would translate exactly, because in addition to our regular property tax, we get EMS levy as well to help support ambulance and fire. So there would be some reduction. That EMS levy revenue would follow the fire and ambulance service wherever it went, but it would reduce our liability in the general fund. It could also be too that looking at this, the council could say, all right, we're going to give so much ramp down like we do with the fire district when we annex our property.
And that's the question goes in that direction. If I'm going to use for the round numbers, $4.5 million, we form an RFA, and now all of a sudden Walla Walla and its general fund is $4.5 million richer.
Yes.
Could we allocate X percentage of that to the RFA to meet some of that expense to lessen the cost of the property taxpayers to fund an RFA?
That's how you could, in theory, that's right. That's exactly right. And the tactic there, the purpose there would be to keep the cost down to the property tax paying citizen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the analysis.
All right, or how about, and College Place has a ambulance utility fund. Walla Walla has an ambulance utility fund.
Right.
Would those two entities, if an RFA were formed, continue to bill the property owners, or however it's done? We talked about in Walla Walla, just per residence, irrespective of the number of people living there, et cetera. Would those ambulance funds continue to be collected by College Place and Walla Walla and then sent to RFA, or would the ambulance utility be subsumed under the RFA and they would collect the money?
I think the latter part would be definitely the preference administratively. Legally, if we both wanted for whatever reason to keep our own separate ambulance utilities, I would suspect we can do that through an interlocal agreement to say, all right, RFA, we're also going to contribute all of our ambulance utility funds to the operation. But they could also assume it directly. That's a possibility, although they don't have a billing agency, so they probably want to come back and work with one of the cities for the purposes of building that ambulance utility as well, or a contract with the city to do it.
Okay, so bottom line, addressing the very legitimate concern that we should all have and that Norma articulated, we form an RFA and all of a sudden the property owners are going to be paying lots more money. Is there some way that they wouldn't have to pay, quote, lots more money by, again, taking our 4.5 million back to Walla Walla and directing it to the RFA and ambulance utility funds, et cetera? So there may still be an increase, but a hell of a lot less than if we continue to get all that tax money, thank you very much, and spent it somewhere else.
Right, exactly, because look at it, in city of Walla Walla, we've got to make the same pitch to our citizens. If we're able to come together and form an RFA, we got to be able to go out there and demonstrate the value. It's because otherwise the citizens are going to say, all right, we got good fire department, we've got a great fire department, we've got great ambulance service. And you're saying form an RFA and make me pay 75 cents more per thousand? For what reason? If it's not logical, but doesn't make financial sense or any other service level of service sense, they aren't going to vote for it.
Okay, if that being the case, then I think that's a very legitimate. I mean, we're talking dollars, all right?
All right.
Very legitimate. Don't we have to, you talked about the study we had of putting it together. Maybe we really just talk literally dollars and cents to talk about if we had an RFA, you know, some sense of how much it would cost. We've talked about the funding, but how much is going to come out of College Places general fund, Walla Walla's general fund, ambulance utilities to pay for an RFA so that we could then come up with a more realistic sense of how much on top of that the various property owners are going to have to pay.
And I think that's what we're asking for. At least City of Walla Walla staff is asking, give us another shot at this. Let us really go drill down on those numbers. Let us bring them back to you and see if we can make financial sense of this.
Would that take a consultant, or do we have?
I probably have to pull FCS back in to assist us with some of the analysis. But we put so much time and effort into this. I'm not ready to just walk away from it. I'd like to see if we can't take one more crack at it. You know, bring in our folks, both from College Place and Walla Walla, and see, can't we figure this out? And maybe we can't, but I'd like to
We
give
should
it.
ask them if they could do it and how much it would cost. And then when we get a number of doing that dollar and cents number crunching,
right,
to see if the two entities are willing to, however, split that cost, to see if we could get a more focused actual number estimate to then address the issues that Norma and others have raised.
Exactly what I'd like to be able to bring back.
Okay, Mr. Peterson had his hand, and then Mr. Jessup.
No, I think it's intriguing. You know, I think we need to, obviously need to look at it again. There was the, and I may be wrong here, and forgive me if my memory is failing me, but I think that original study, from what we looked at, there was an explosion of administrative costs. Was the one thing that really hampered that. And so a fresh look at that, of course, would be good. And that comes down to how many cooks are in the kitchen, I guess, as far as administrative and whatnot. The other thing I think we need to keep in mind, we felt that there could be some capital savings. We've got a girls' dorm that's a multiple story building here in College Place and whatnot. And I think the other savings are potentially between the two cities is the capital purchases of what trucks and who responds to what, when it comes to some of our facilities. So we obviously have to keep that in mind. Thanks.
Mr. Jessup?
Yeah, again, if this is addressed in that study 4 years ago, I haven't had a chance to take a look at that. But what then, that's a part of that question, two-part question again, is one, what then does happen to all the current employees and or volunteers if something of this nature was to form, if one side doesn't have a union, one does, and so on and so forth? What does happen to all those personnel if RFA is created? And secondly, who is the governing entity then if an RFA is formed and it deals with the legalities, deals with the liability, deals with the taxing and the rules and so on and so forth? Like, how does that work?
So again, without getting twisted into the weeds on the employee issue, the approach we are going to use is nobody loses their job, everybody stays. Yeah, I don't even know. Are you guys IAFF?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
we're IAFF, so our contracts would merge. I mean, I know they're not the same today, but the IAFF would stay there. Based on past experience with Camas and Washougal, the volunteers are still volunteers. And then the responsible board legally and for all hiring decisions, budgetary decisions will be the RFA Board of Commissioners. They will be elected between the two cities. You'll decide the size of the board. That's what you'll do. Is it 3, 5, 7? And there it is. And then they take it over. Just like Fire District 4. We don't do their budget. We don't vote for them. They're their own entity. And that's what this would be. It would be truly an independent body.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, speaking of Fire District 4, I will come back to that. So do you think that by doing the study, it might entice Fire District 4 to consider it? I mean, I looked it up and it said there's like 10,000 people that live in the Fire District 4 service territory. That's a lot.
I don't know. I don't know what their response would be. And city, from City Hall law perspective, we were just hoping we could get one or the other, just to step into this. Frankly, just from an administrative standpoint, I think it'd be easier to just have one other dance partner than trying to get two at the same time. And it doesn't prohibit or prevent Fire District 4 or 8 or others from joining that RFA in the future. That's how we saw Tualatin grow and others. If two entities come together, then it got up operating. One of the other entities saw it made sense and chose to join at a later date.
I guess that's what I was wondering if they could join later, because I noticed, I know there's District 4 fire stations in the city of Walla Walla.
Right. And they're on both sides of us.
Right.
And as you spoke to, or no, as a gentleman on the screen, I forget your name, that was one of the early things we looked at was the future purchase and construction of capital facilities and equipment. We could be much more judicious on where they're going to be located rather than, because you're a separate entity, we're going to start putting, these substations right around your city. It just doesn't make good allocation sense of capital. Or I think they were also talking about the multi-story building. It's over $1 million for the ladder truck today. And, why not share? We've got a ladder truck that we had to buy. Well, if we were together, that's part of the equipment package. It would go with the RFA. And you're right. You just can't look at the present numbers. You got to look at the downstream savings on, better utilization of facilities.
Ms. Boyle?
So if we do an RFA, do the cities have to determine what a unit definition is again? Or does the RFA get to do that as far as figuring out those tax amounts?
We just had 5 months of trying to figure out what a unit.
Oh, yeah, for their budget, yeah.
Yeah, that would be an RFA.
Yeah, I think, so essentially, we do this, the cities are out.
Correct. It's everything's out of our hands.
Now, I got to say this, though. I got to look at the composition of the RFA board and how much control councils have over it. I guess it's possible, but I don't know for sure that you could structure it so you say it's so many council members from Walla Walla, so many council members from College Place, and you are the board. Does that work?
Yeah, because so I worked in my previous jurisdiction, formed an RFA with cities of Auburn, Algona, and Pacific, and the RFA board was 3 council members from each city. And so you acted as, even though you had a council member hat for the city you were from, once you sat on that RFA board, you just wore that hat. And so that worked, as far as I know, it still works. And they formed that back in 2007. So that is an alternative that each council could consider as well. Because then you retain some connection and oversight, because the minute you separate and have the RFA, you still have to work with that RFA for your permitting and your inspections and some of those other details that all get worked out as well. And I think having representation from each side of the councils kind of keeps it connected with each jurisdiction still.
Okay, I'm going to ask just a basic question that I feel that one of our residents would ask. Right now, we have a great fire department. We're happy. We're getting all the services we need at a cost we can afford. Why would we want to do this?
Well, today you've got a great fire department. You got ALS service from the city of. What will be in a decade? Are we going to be able to, let's just be honest, is the city of Walla Walla going to be able to afford to provide ALS service at some point? This is a financial burden this city isn't going to be able to carry in the future. So I think you're talking about the stabilization of at least the level of service you receive today from both cities. And then additionally, I really believe by the RFA coming together, you're going to see an increase in level of service and stability, and avoid this back and forth every year on EMS levies and how we're going to split them. And are we going to jack up the charges? Are we going to talk about restricting service? I think it just provides for a more long-term stable service. And I really think we can squeeze out some of the efficiencies down the road again with mutual purchases of equipment or buying equipment that serves both communities, stations that are located that serve both communities, instead of you figuring out where your next station is just to serve your community. I really believe we can do it better together. And that's what it's about. And we're not going to, again, if we do our job and we can do this correctly, there isn't going to be a huge increase to our citizens. I don't know. I don't know if we can get there, but I'd like to try.
And you said you you worked somewhere that had paid and volunteer.
Yep, combined. Yeah, that
Okay,
worked
so
well.
how did, see, so I'm picturing in dealing with collective bargaining, I'm picturing these people getting all these benefits because they're part of the union, and these people watching these people get all the benefits.
Sure.
How do they deal with that?
Well, all those people that are volunteers have other jobs and occupations, and they do this because they like responding to fires and the excitement. It also gives them a heads up if they ever want to become a firefighter. Now that I've been a volunteer, I've trained with this group, you probably have an advantage over somebody coming in from the outside and saying they're going to apply. I didn't see any impact that there was a jealousy that they were paid.
What about attitudes from this side to this side?
Yeah,
I mean, are these the kids kind of thing, go to the kid table?
The biggest thing, the biggest rub I saw between paid professional firefighter and a volunteer, just treat the volunteers want to be treated with respect. They don't want to just be given the duties when the truck comes back in, that they've got to now clean the truck or roll up the hoses. They've got to be able to have opportunities for real training and step up and work side by side with the true firefighting and learning. So just don't use them as janitors and treat them as second string. And that was the biggest issue I saw there, was that level of respect between the two groups. And they did that just fine. I didn't see those issues. And I never saw a bargaining issue or a negative word about what they were getting paid or their benefit package.
Yeah, I think, Norman, your question is an excellent one, but aren't you already dealing with that? Don't you already have paid firefighters and volunteers? So to the degree that they get along and you don't have tension, it would be hopefully just writ larger than what you're doing now.
Chief Energy.
I think, I'd love to say I wear rose-colored glasses, but putting the two together with one entity that doesn't have that in their command structure today, it would be a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but I expect some struggles, just as I expect struggles every day I go to work, just like the rest of you. But it's not work. It's not called play. The two concerns I have from my standpoint is the cost point, where today fire service in College Place is about 50 cents per 1,000. If I look at my budget, I can't imagine having 50 some employees in Walla Walla that your price point is the same as mine. That doesn't mean that can't be moved one way or the other. I don't know that. I'm not on the finance side. And maybe it's a decision for College Place citizens to say, if you can't afford to give us ALS down the road, that we start our own, hopefully not, or we don't need it because we're 3 minutes from the hospital. I don't have those answers. I just very much am concerned about the cost when I know little I'm able to do it for versus a department that has 10 times the amount of paid employees. It almost can't be seen. That doesn't make sense.
Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, Councilmember Peterson. I should know the answer to this question. I apologize. What requires the city of Walla Walla to respond to College Place with ALS?
Basically, it's that EMS levy that's done across the county level, because that helped cover the ALS with the exception of that Burbank area, but that's because District 5 does like ALS themselves. So anything that gets collected in District 5 stays there pretty much. But for the rest of that EMS levy, that was like part of that from back when it was constituted way back when.
Yeah, so I'm asking the question if, and it goes back to the question of why, if somebody likes the service in College Place right now, why do we change? If Walla Walla were to have a budget crisis in that area, they could pull back from ALS service from College Place in the future?
Yes, but Mike is right. While there's no legal requirement for the city of Walla Walla to provide ALS service outside its jurisdiction, there is a financial incentive built into the EMS. We get all of our EMS levy plus a little bit more to provide that ALS service outside city limits. So if the city ceased doing that, that would be a call of the county commissioners, but we anticipate they would adjust the EMS levy back down.
So College Place residents already pay something into that levy for the
There's a
ALS?
small piece in that
Okay,
EMS
just
levy that comes over.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes and no.
Yes and no? Okay.
Currently, the city of College Place collects or receives more than we collect within our borders because we have those nursing homes and those so many calls because of how the formula is worked. So the extra that the city of Walla Walla is actually collecting is probably from the fire district.
From the fire districts, that could be sure.
Because just call
Okay. Mr. Espinosa?
Could you ask Chief Knowles about the volunteer aspect? Would you see that as a problem?
All that happens all over the place, combination of departments. Will there be growing pains? Absolutely, there's growing pains. That's not an insurmountable.
You have some though. I mean, I remember meeting some community college kids that were working there.
We've had resident programs in the city department before. Similar to what Chief Winter has in College Place where it is residents. It's not, it has not been a constant for us.
Mr. Espinosa?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a question for Mr. Nabil. Do you have an idea of what the cost burden is for Walla Walla for providing those services to College Place as of 2021, just to give us a ballpark figure?
I don't have those numbers in front of me. When FCS did the analysis, they had that in it, and it was a couple of years old. I think that'd probably be one of the reasons to refresh this if we're serious about this, but I don't have it right off the top, and I don't know if anybody out here has it. Yeah. It's, I mean, I hate to say, I want to remember looking at the old study, $300,000-$400,000, somewhere in that range, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Thank you.
Mr. Moss?
Mayor, thank you. Back to this EMS levy, it's constituted for 6 years, as I understand, and then it has to be taken back to the voters. If an RFA were to come about, would the RFA then establish an EMS?
No, it would still fall under that probably, but the RFA has to be re-voted on, depending on how it's set up. The plan has to be looked at every 10 years and readjusted, but if you have a benefit charge on that, every 6 years, that benefit charge has to be re-voted on.
Yeah, I'm not, I would assume that's a correct answer. I'm not certain.
But there is a way then for the taxpayer to understand what they're paying for, what they get.
So if you look at the formula for a benefit charge, no, it is very complicated. Yeah. Maybe CPA can figure that one out, but some of the figuring in that, yeah.
And then, but the county then would still be inclined to have an EMS for the other rural districts.
And I know that's their preference. I'd like to keep the EMS levy as one. Because in theory, again, we could go our separate ways and run our own EMS levies. That has been discussed. I mean, when we were getting real serious about pulling back our ambulance service, that's one of the things we looked at, just run our own EMS levy independent of the others. And they didn't like that idea at all.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments regarding the RFA discussion?
I guess my only question is there any consensus or desire for a next step? Second look at this for just the two entities and maybe pulling in some expertise from
FCS.
Okay, you're probably going to hate me for this, but I would not be able to support paying again for another study. That's my opinion, but it would be up to my council members.
Well, we would probably want to define what we want to buy from them and get a cost.
How much it costs.
Cost estimate, yes.
I'd hazard a guess you're probably talking in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 worth of work.
Council members, any comments, thoughts?
Oh, I'd be interested in seeing it, but it would depend on this cost when we just talk about it. But I think it sounds like very different calculations if we're extracting District 4 from this. But I don't feel like we have all of the facts that we need to have to make that decision right now. So, I mean, that's where I'd be interested in seeing that. But yeah, if it's an excessive amount of money, then that doesn't make sense. But again, we're here to make it better for the citizens of the community. So if making that investment to get that information helps us. And again, like you said, if we get to the end of it and it says, no, it's not going to work because it's going to change everybody's rates, then that's obviously not feasible. But that's just my opinion.
How about if we contact the contractors?
Sure.
And we'll get a specific number. We'll tell them what we want. We have a specific number. We will share that with you, and then you can decide if you want to pay a portion or whatever and respond. And if you do, we'll go forward. If you don't, well, we've talked about it.
I think that would be most helpful.
I think it's a really good idea, Your Honor. I mean, again, this is a difficult decision. There's not real clear alignment here, and I know there's real concern. And so maybe that's the best approach. We can contact FCS, say, this is what we're thinking. Based on all the information you already have from us, how much would it take to update that? Share that information with you, and then you folks can talk about it amongst yourselves and decide, okay, do we want to go this way? Even though the managers in Walla Walla saying, come on, raw, let's give it one more shot. Does it make sense?
And just so we're clear, at least from my perspective, and to the very legitimate questions raised by College Place.
Right.
What's it going to cost? What's going to cost our residents as well, right? So we want them to focus on the issues we talked about. You know, if it's going to be a property tax, and the cities, both of them are getting property tax already. I mean, is some of that then going to be funneled back to the RFA? Those are the sorts of specific dollar and cent issues we want them to address and give us as detailed information as possible so you can make that informed decision.
It's a very expensive dance card.
Oh, it is, yes. Yeah, you're right.
Mr. Peterson?
Yeah.
No, I support a study. I think there are so many unknowns right now. And if it's 15 or 20, and we split it in half, what are you talking about, 10 apiece or 7 apiece or whatever? I think there needs to be guidance, though, that with this study, we're not looking for perfection, or a polished brass, whatever. We're our eye is on the cost reduction. We're not looking at multiple levels of administration in this thing. We're looking at streamlining it. We're looking at, cost savings, approach it from that perspective, not from the perspective of perfection, from where I think the last study was at. So, but I think we just have so many unanswered questions. We don't know right now. Is this going to save us $1 million a year? Or is it going to cost us $1 million a year? We don't know that right now until we do the study. So, yeah.
It won't save you $1 million a year. I promise you that.
All right, anything else before we move on to the UGA discussion? All right, thank you all. I know this was not an easy one. I want you to know that I respect your discussions and I appreciate it. So thank you for allowing us as well and me mostly to talk about my fears. Okay, so Elizabeth, you're going to take charge with the Growth Management Act collaboration?
Yes, and actually, I think this is fitting to kind of conclude with this topic because a lot of what we've talked about already really feeds into how are we thinking about our growth and planning for that growth over the next 20 years, and how can we partner and look at this from a regional perspective versus each entity. And so I think it's fitting that we're ending with growth management. So really the three areas I thought I'd highlight, and please stop and ask questions, is really some of the things that came to light when we did our last kind of big update to our comprehensive plans back in 2018. And that was looking at how do we look at land capacity within the county? Why is that important? One, because we get allocated a certain population, starts at the state level, gets allocated to the county, and then it gets dispersed to the cities. And do we have sufficient land to accommodate that growth over the next 20 years is essentially what we're looking at. And so when we look at land capacity, do we have capacity or not? If you have land capacity, then your UGA and your existing city limits are looked at as being sufficient to accommodate that growth. If you don't have the capacity, well, then you're looking at whether, are you bumping up densities, or are we having a conversation about expanding our urban growth areas? So that's why that land capacity analysis is such a key component when we're looking at our comprehensive plan, as well as how are we allocating population to the jurisdictions. We have pretty, I think, old methodologies we would agree on. I think between John and I, they're pretty old, and we've kind of just piled them on year after year. We've just used the same methodology, and they really need to be refreshed. One of our challenges, of course, is a lot of this is led by the county at the county level. That's the way GMA was structured. And so trying to bring along our county partners in this has been a challenge for the two cities. And so one of the ways we want to look at is how can we collaborate as the two entities to sort of maybe move that needle in that conversation with our county partners. The other thing, talking about is really where does it make sense to have our urban growth areas. One example, Walla Walla, we actually removed some area from the urban growth area our last round because it didn't make sense to serve it with utilities. It was quite costly. So that's another thing I think we could look at is how when we start partnering on, well, where does it make sense to grow? How can we efficiently serve the urban growth areas with utilities? Does it make sense to have the residential growth on the College Place side or the Walla Walla side, or in same conversation around commercial development and industrial development. So really looking at it strategically on both cities' parts. And this also feeds into the regional wastewater discussion that we talked about as our first agenda item. Do we have sufficient capacity within our utilities to serve the growth that we're expecting over the next 20 years? And how do we look at that as the two jurisdictions? And really the RFA plays into it as well, because another thing that we have to look at when you're up to accommodating growth is, do you have all the services that the cities provide? Can we provide those sufficiently to meet the growth demand? And so I've been talking about growth, and if both councils recall, we partnered with Waitsburg and Dayton, but College Place and Walla Walla on our regional housing action plan that both cities adopted last year. Between the two jurisdictions, we need just shy of 4,500 units, housing units over the next 20 years. About 3,700 for Walla Walla and just almost about 800 for College Place. Again, where are we going to put that growth? Do we, both jurisdictions have really worked on bumping up our density so we can support infill development. That is going to go a long way, but that's not going to accomplish it all. So again, how can we strategically look at where do we need to expand our urban growth boundaries? Can we expand the urban growth boundaries? It goes back to that land capacity analysis of answering yes or no. And then again, where does it make sense to put that growth, both from a utility standpoint, transportation, and then all the other services that we provide as a jurisdiction. So really, I have a feeling, I think there has been consensus in the past for the two cities to work together on this front, but this was one of the things we wanted to bring forward to the two councils to probably reaffirm that, and then probably look at some strategies on how we can nudge our county partner along, hopefully in this conversation, and see how we can get to the finish line on some of these things I know we're desirous of accomplishing. So anything, Mike, you want to expand on that?
Well, yeah, we just really need to build this partnership, develop the BLI, billable land inventories jointly, because fact of the matter is, especially in College Place, with how dense of a community we are. I mean, a lot of people don't know this. If you run the stats on GIS, our density is about 5,000 people a square mile. That's a lot. You aren't going to get much denser than that. So thinking College Place is going to infill our way out of this, that doesn't make any sense at all. So it needs to be a combination of that as well as greenfield. So it makes all sense the world that we both need to work in, hopefully change minds at the county level, because it has ramifications for economic development too. But as far as tampering down demand, and then also, I mean, I hear it all the time from workers of VA, Army Corps, they can't find housing because there's not enough of it. And the amount of people right now that we're losing just because they can't find a home and are having a commute from like Pasco and Kennewick, my wife included, right now, is a lot. So we need to get ahead of this. John, do you have any? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think Elizabeth hit on the hot topics. My big part is population. When we started with the GMA, Southwood College Place is 20% population. And that's been the number for what we've been allocated. No matter what we do, no matter how big our wastewater treatment plan is and how big our water system is and water rights are, we can't be bigger than 15% of what we're allocated. So we just need to work together. We need to collaborate, look at our UGAs. We talked about, the joint urban growth area where it's more about capacity to serve rather than, a bunch of the other equations that go into it. So I think Elizabeth and I are on the same page, and we want to work together.
Questions or we can answer on this front, what all this means?
You were talking about, or Mike was talking about people having difficulty to find housing. I've been meeting with the school district and they have significantly declined enrollment because families those that are moving out aren't coming back in. They're not getting new families because they can't find a home to live in, right? So it's affecting the whole cycle of our ecosystem over here and our economics of survival. Susan.
We've also had some candidates for administration and teachers who have withdrawn their applications because they couldn't find a place to live. So
I hear this repeatedly from our superintendent of Walla Walla schools. Everything I told you, it's what are you doing about housing? I've got people that are not taking jobs, our enrollment is dropping. You've got to create the housing.
Yep, absolutely. And that makes me nervous too, because that's affecting our future generations, right? It's affecting how our community loses its family feel. If we're going to lose our children, it's just going to change the whole way that this community is, right? For lack of a better word. I like seeing kids. I like that we have a mixed intergenerational population here, and that really worries me that we're going to lose our families. I come from Seattle, you all know, but in West Seattle where I lived, schools just declined so much in that area because a lot of childless families or couples, because the families couldn't afford the houses, and the houses that were there weren't designed for families. And I don't want to see that here. Okay, questions or comments for Elizabeth or John?
So again, sounds like we've got staff that are very knowledgeable in this area, what the needs are. What are you looking for the two councils just to give the nod, continue that work, bring back?
I believe so.
Challenge to us as policymakers as to what our next steps need to be.
Yep. Mr. Espinosa, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I certainly think that this is one of the issues that Walla Walla and College Place needs to lock arms and work hand in hand with the county commissioners so that we can make some real progress in the right direction, because as you guys are mentioning, it's a real problem that it's impacting quality of life, businesses, jobs, economic outlook for our communities. So I think it's something that we got to take serious and work as a unit to really move forward with the county commissioners and making some progress. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation tonight.
So I think not much conversation needed here, where you say move forward to Elizabeth and John, and let's see how the two cities can strengthen our arguments for expansion.
If we could just talk timetable a little bit.
Yeah,
What are the deliverables and?
Yes, thank you. So we have been working at the staff level with our counterpart over in County Community Development to start working on an update to the countywide planning policies to set the stage for when we need to do our next update to our comprehensive plans, which for our county is due in 2026, I believe. And so the timing is pretty, we're at the right time to do some of these preliminary updates to set the stage for us to do those comp plan work. I would say let maybe the staff kind of brainstorm some approaches and come back to the councils of if there's some communications that could be done elected to elected, while the staff kind of work on our staff to staff communications, and then we can bring back some perhaps some recommendations and some strategies to hopefully move us forward. I would say on a time frame, we've already started working on a request for proposals, because we will need a consultant to help us with some of this update work. And so there will be some budget asks for each jurisdiction to contribute to some of that work. I'm going to say maybe summerish, we probably can come back with some hopefully some next steps and some strategies, kind of seeing some nods there. Because we can't delay too much longer, because if we delay, then it's really putting us up. And I know 2026 seems a ways off because it's 4 years, but in the world of planning, that is not that far away, and it sneaks up on us a lot faster than we like to think.
Mr. Peterson?
No, I appreciate that. I was actually thinking, is there any way to speed that up? I'm currently working here out of the Tri-Cities every day, and they're literally putting a community the size of College Place up in Broadmoor as we speak. They're literally putting a city the size of College Place up on Southridge as we speak. Time's a wasting here. I understand that, yeah, there's a lot of work that has to be done there, but I've never seen growth activity like I'm seeing here in Tri-Cities right now. When I come over here, it's just amazing. It's obviously, with the Amazon, with the 1,800 employees being added, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I guess all haste as far as what we can do to study this and what we can do to short circuit this at some point to get, to address the housing issue in particular.
All right. It sounds like you've got your go forth and do good, or let us know how we can support you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That's the end of our agenda. Is there anything else somebody wants to go to the order, bring up, discuss? Mr. Moss?
Mayor, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your openness in agreeing to this now second meeting. And I think we've come to some agreement, at least on where we want to move direction. I'm a little fearful when I hear about 8,000 or 9,000 people growth in 2 areas of the Tri-Cities. That's not what I envision Walla Walla. That's not what planners are saying we need to do. But again, being thoughtful about all of these things in a collaboration manner, I really appreciate your willingness to do this.
And the truth is, nothing stalled, right? So with everybody putting in their thoughts, nothing stalled. So I think it's great.
Do we want to try to schedule 3 or 4 meetings a year, or just something to think about? How do we want to get ongoing reports back on progress and other issues that may come up? So nobody is blindsided.
If I could follow up on that for the good of both of our councils and mayors, I just want to recap where we are and what the expectations are. So wastewater, Mike reported we should have a report back from JUB on the analysis December-ish, somewhere in there. We'll push them along, but they're going to provide the deliverable. On broadband, we'll just give you the periodic updates as the franchises come in and we process those. But I mean, that's really what it's down to
Yeah.
now, just franchise
Oh, yeah, they're
processing.
ready to go, yeah.
Revenue sharing, if you give us 6 months to do the research, I'd say report back in the fall, probably October, November, right when we're in the middle of budget like you. Myra Road Corps analysis, I think we could do the same thing, about the same time frame. Give a report back by this fall. We should have been able to have, put our heads together and at least get moving forward on some thoughts on that, if not more. Regional Fire Authority, the next step is talk with FCS, say, okay, this is what we're thinking. How much would it cost? We'll turn that over to you and you can respond. And then Growth Management Act, I heard summerish. They'll come back with a report. So
I thought you said that the wastewater was October. The plan itself will come back in draft form by the end of October, Halloween, but then the decision point will be the end of December-ish, January-ish. So
The decision, by who?
basically, by both of us, if we think it has validity to it, because if we believe the study has validity to it, what College Place is going to have to do is at least accept part of the loan, because no matter where we ship the sewage to, there still needs to be some filters and stuff, even if that gets converted to a lift station. So we would accept a partial loan, and then they would give essentially a reprieve on the rest of the requirements and kick it out longer if we were working together. That was what they told me. So ecology.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else?
I'm hearing maybe a late summer kind of meeting that we can get some.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Someday you'll have to come to College Place. The city of College Place is just past Home Depot, north of.
All right, in all fairness, we asked them, where do you want to meet?
Under construction here.
Yeah, we're going to be under construction, but when we're back, we'll host you. And thank you so much for hosting us. Truly, we appreciate it.
All right, so if we come to your house, the Mayor Scrivener gets to run the meeting?
There you go. All right, thank you. So then with that, the meeting is concluded.
Thank you.